Well, Frank Robbins was the branch secretary for the theatre and cinema branch, and it was across the room from us. They sort of were in the room above the front door on Eden Quay. And from the outset, Frank, to me, was a man who kind of commanded respect among the rest of the officials. And he'd come over on occasion to Jim Gilhooley, who was my branch secretary, and they'd be chatting away in the inside room. And it was always struck me that Frank was seen as a leader kind of thing, although he was very often very surly and would sort of not be a convivial kind of person. But I got to know him better as time went on, and he had odd kind of peculiar kind of way of thinking, I think, in some ways. My first real sort of problem with him was my main preoccupation was keeping two fires burning in one in the branch office, one in the branch secretary's office, because the place was so damp. Your man got asthma or something if the fire wasn't kept lighting. And one day Frank came in and he had his paper on there was a desk kind of before you, a counter kind of before you came into the office itself, and he put his paper up on it and he says, "Your fire is out." I thought the man is absolutely daft, because I was at a fire, and he said, "The one inside." And I went in and looked, and it was, I think, a sackable offence to let a fire go out, and I'd have no way of relighting it. And he said, "Your branch secretary now will not be a happy man." And I said, "Neither will I." I don't know what to do, because we had coal in a built press out in a room. It was like a garage or something attached inside the building, and but there was nothing else that I could find in it. And he said, "Leave it to me." And he took his paper and he sort of redid the fire and put the outside of the paper up to draw the draft, he said, which I'd never seen anyone do before. And he said, "You see, I was a stoker on a ship going to America, and I learned about fires." I said, "And a stoker on a ship?" "Yeah," he says, "I made my escape that way." Now, I don't know whether that's factual or not, but he did relight the fire and put the coal on and whatever, and we had a range here instead of that, and it was only my mother could do anything with it. But he redid the fire, took out the cinders from underneath it, and he said, "Now you put them on the top when the fire is well going." And he said, "And this is between the two of us, and nobody else need know," which meant my branch secretary kind of thing. And he walked away, and he never did say anything to anyone. Because, I mean, you could have made a joke out of it or whatever. Your woman couldn't even keep a fire, you know. But so I got to know him fairly well after that, and I remember him saying one day again in the office, he says, "You know, I have made a point of never having a female in my office." And I said, "Aren't you missing something?" And he said, no. You see, I was thinking in different terms. I was thinking in terms of progression to officership of that young man. And of course, for women, it would have been out. And I was sort of thinking, it's a strange sort of way he was sort of putting it, that he would bring a young fella in to do the office work, who would then sort of in time become an officer. And he said, you're the only one that I would have had in my office. So have you ever thought of coming over? Which was the hugest compliment at the time. So I said, no, I'm happy where I am. And he says, well, stick with it. And I remember when the, don't know what you call it, they were putting in the stone into the 10th floor or whatever of the new Liberty Hall. You know, this thing they put something into a cavity and have a big speech and what have you. And it was on the 10th floor of the emerging Liberty Hall, and there was to be a celebration and invited staff, and I said, God, I wonder what it'd be like up there. And I went along, the only woman, and we went up on one of these cranes, which was fabulous, and onto the 10th floor Liberty Hall, which was the top floor at the point with a cement floor and a hole in the middle where the lift shaft would go, and small walls around it, and the areas where the windows would be, and metal poles sort of coming up through it, and the wind on the top was extraordinary, and the cold. And they had this, they'd stopped the building for the day, and they had the premises manager and whoever there, and it was John Conroy doing the speech making. I haven't a clue what he said. It went in one ear and out the other, but I was standing near to Frank, and of course there was a great sense of, for the first time, it was a building for workers, and Frank was the chairman of the district council, and he would have a speaking point in the ceremony. I was standing near him, and he said, and I've never forgotten it, he said, this is the first time Irish workers have looked down on the city they created. And there was a tear running down his cheek. And I haven't the slightest remembrance of what John Conroy said, but I do remember that because the man was deeply moved. It was difficult at times. There was time, I remember him telling me a story about when he was thrown into the Liffey because he was wearing the union badge, and the two unions had severed connections, and was hard put to swim to a ladder because of the bitterness and the squabble between the two unions. And he had that bitterness, I think, in him to the end. But I would have great regard for him, and a difficult man to talk to. But at times he talked to me, and I know with Jim Gilhooly and them, they rated him very highly. He was the man who would kind of lead the discussion when they were going to do something or make some kind of a move on something. Because somebody said he's been there, done that. An impressive man, but could be terribly short-tempered. I had to have an appointment to see him, his members, and I mean, you get a huge number of cinemas, and the ushers, usherettes would all be members, and theatres as well. And he had an appointment system, so if you wanted to see him, you called and made an appointment. And his attitude was, my time is just as important as any of these guys in the business, and I can't hang around waiting for somebody who might call. If they call, they'd be received, dealt with, and gone. But I don't stand around waiting. Which there's a certain amount of truth in it, because there's an awful lot of time just spent in talking. But his membership, like I would know a lot of the theatre people from that, and he could always get some of the theatrical people to do a show for a charity or whatever. He was always getting cut for that kind of thing. And they were, I suppose, the most giving kind of membership, really, in that sense. I think he had a kind of belief that the trade union movement was too quiet, too giving, if you can put it that kind of way, where a bit more, what would you call it, going out on a limb would have been better. I got the impression sometimes from him like that it was easy to be nice, but in his book you had to tell the truth. I got that impression from him. He could be very angry. I must say, for me, he always sort of was pleasant. And I mean, I'll never forget the thing about the fire. To me, it was one of those things that was a sackable offence, to be honest, because for the Grand Secretary at the time, it could mean that he was laid up for a while, you know, with a sore throat or whatever, because of the damp, because he'd be there for meetings long after we'd all be gone. And the building was falling apart, really. I mean, windows didn't close, the floors rotting, the walls damp, you know, and the fire was the only thing that made it possible. Of course, we boiled the kettle on the fire, we made the tea and whatever, and I'd have to bring it in now and again to him. But he was a meticulous man, Jim Gilhooly, in that way. I always believed that anything I learned about trade unions, I learned from him, because he gave me a bit of space, I think, as well, you know, to see what it meant. It wasn't just kind of take a letter, Miss O'Brien, kind of thing, which it was in some other offices. He spoke about the problems.